A live news event happening now to tell you about official spokeswoman for Russia's foreign ministry, Marina Zakharova, addressing a number of issues right now, including Moscow's airstrike campaign in Syria. Let's listen in. Live news conference for you.
To the actions taken on the ground and in the air to fight ISIS, the topic would be different. I may call it anti-Russian campaign in mass media in relation to the beginning of military part of combating ISIS following the request of the official Damascus. After the beginning of the military part of anti-terrorist operation by Russian troops in Syria, which began following the official request from the government of this country, the world mass media unleashed powerful anti-Russian information campaign about. Well, there were lots of accusations, mostly illegal, illogical, unclear actions of Russia in Syria. We saw different accusations. We were accused of following our own personal interests, just Russian interests in the region, which were covered by fight with ISIS and other terrorist groups. We were also accused in the death of civilians, including children. Whatever happens in mass media nowadays is pretty simple. I will tell you, but you can check it up every day. First, there are words of some officials from the countries which unfortunately do not understand why our policy is logical and sequential at this stage. So first there are some official statements, and they also set the tone to numerous publications. And there are also comments based on some unofficial and unsupported and unnamed sources. The main purpose of all these statements, the main content of these statements, says that the task of Russia is to destroy moderate opposition in the region. And as a rule, it is all illustrated by pictures, which again are either archived or had nothing to do with this region, with this period of time. It is also supported by video materials, which, when checked, are found having nothing to do with the situation. Presently, I can tell you without any exaggeration that any Western mass media used these tactics of operation. I would cite several examples now. I want you to find out about it, and maybe in these materials you will see yourself or your own mass media, and then probably we shall think about how to avoid similar situations in the future. For instance, foreign policy, serious publication, and we also quote it pretty often. Quite recently, they published an article by Mr. Reed Standish. It is translated into Russian, and it is accessible. It is published on the portal, and it says that the alliance of rebels who are against ISIS. So they were victims of our bombing, and the reference is to the Foundation on Human Rights on Syria in Great Britain. The quote, on Friday, Russia said that it hit the camps in the area of Raqqa, but there is an opinion that the bombing was in the regions which were controlled by different rebel groups. Whose opinion is this? If we say about serious journalism, which does not serve somebody's interest, but the world journalism, which should raise the problematic issues and explain what happens in the world, how can you use the data with such words as "there is an opinion"? Whose opinion? Where is this opinion? Please give us facts, pictures, specific data from the earth. If you are serious journalists, if you are the journalist to be referred later by UN experts in their presentations, in their reports, official structures, so what kind of there is an opinion if we talk about victims and people, there is an opinion. Such publications have, as I said, specific kind of directing, but, well, prepared ground. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Great Britain, Mr. Hammond, says that the Russian involvement in Syria is a small specimen of a Russian asymmetric use of conducting war. This is a serious policy. This is really something serious. We talk for a long time about fighting the world evil. How can you use such words when we talk about official words of an official representative of the country? Another assessment of the events to Syria was made by Mr. Cameron, the British Prime Minister. He said that the Russian anti-terrorist operation in Syria is a mistake. So it's not only a political assessment, it's the response of the international community to our specific efforts to combat international terrorism. Is this a mistake? Please explain to us, give us facts, why it is a mistake. But this is the shaping of public opinion, because people watch TVs at their kitchens and they believe these people and they believe it's a mistake. Please support your words with some specific materials and facts. You are the leaders of your states. You have to be responsible for your words, because people's destinies depend on your words. This is another quote. Russia supports the butcher Assad, which is a blunder for them and for the world. This would destabilize the situation in the region, and the majority of the Russian airstrikes were in the area of Syria, non-controlled ISIS group, but it is controlled by other opponents of the regime, and this is said by the head of the state. He is pretty emotional in his assessment, and he says about mistakes without showing any facts. Similar responses from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the United States, Mr. Carter, high-ranking official of the American military bloc. So he explains, he says that possibly, probably, it seems, he is not the Minister of Culture. He is not the Minister of Sports or Tourism. He is the Minister of Defense. Possibly, probably, it seems. I have to say that at last, we have restored the channel of communication with the United States on the level of the Ministry of Defense and some enforcement structures of our countries. If it is possible, probable, and it seems, you can telephone and then later provide the public with specific assessments. If such telephone conversations may take place on a regular basis, and if you are concerned about something, then you ask us again, specify the facts. We may be criticized for being non-transparent within the recent years, but the level of openness which is shown by the Department Department of Defense recently, especially in relation to Syrian problem. It is unprecedented. Lots of briefings, any video and photo materials. This is just public sphere of dealing with journalists. But probably not everybody understands it, but we are open for contacts in the military line for experts of other countries, and if somebody is concerned, we are ready to answer. But why should you go to briefing and say possibly, probably, and it seems? You should take up the receiver and call to your Russian colleagues, and they would explain the facts and respond to your concerns. Naturally, after such statements, the world mass media comes with the following headings, and they say that the purposes, the goals, true goals of Russia is not ISIS. I was in New York as a part of the Russian delegation. In my hotel, I saw the news. Next day, after the decision of the Russian Federation to help the Syrian government in combating ISIS, all the TV channels, American and Canadian, responded to this. But how it all started? There was a running line, or there was just a text on the screen. What are the real goals of Russia in the region? What are true purposes of Russia in Syria? Is it true that Russia fights ISIS? In this way, you develop, you form, you shape the public opinion. It's not objective. Where is the field for coordination and assistance which we talk about? This is a pre-planned summing up what has just started. We are in for cooperation, for interaction. No, immediately there is a conviction. Goals of Russia in Syria are not those that are announced publicly. Press Secretary of the White House, Mr. Ernst, said recently that the United States are assured that the military planes of Russia in Syria hit the territory which is occupied by the Syrian opposition and not by ISIS. I saw, he says, several notes that there were a couple of airstrikes made by Russia on the territory which is controlled by ISIS. But there are no traces that Russia changed its policy in fighting ISIS. They concentrate their efforts on the territory which is taken by the Assad opponents. Among them may be certain extremists. I have to remind you, it was not a year ago, not 2 years ago, but human memory can hold events of 10 years back. I want to remind you terrorist acts of 9/11 when we felt the pain of the states as our own, because we understand only too well what terrorism is about. And when Washington declared, well, he said it's a challenge to the national security, it's the strike on the country, and we supported the United States in everything and everywhere. In the Security Council, we presented our help to fight terrorists, and we didn't ask whether these terrorists were bad or not too bad. If someone is a terrorist, if he explodes the house and kills your child, he is a terrorist. I'd like to remind you another thing. Till recently, the international community didn't develop a united term which would explain the meaning of terrorism. There is no such a term, and in each country there is its own national legislation which regulates this area. We understand it. But we should still fight together against the terrorist threat. Our countries supported other countries in their fights with terrorism. For us, this is an issue of national security. We know what it is. We have lived through it, and we don't want the repetition of an international terrorism, which we went through. This is too painful for us, and we expect understanding. One more thing which should be mentioned as well. So all this general concept is supported by mass media. They say that Russia bombs Hama, Homs, Rastan, Idlib, where, as journalists say, and officials, there are no terrorists at all. So this is against moderate opposition and civilian population. Like, for instance, BBC published a geography of airstrikes by our air forces on Syrian territory. See, again, the memory should not be that short. A brief period of time back before the beginning of the Russian bombing against ISIS, the same mass media said that in these regions there are ISIS groups. In the beginning of August, there was a kidnapping of Christians in the Homs area. Is it any different Homs? There are many Homses in Syria. Oh, this is just hypocrisy. You say that fighters kidnapped 200 Christians in Homs, and then 1 month later you say that there are no ISIS. And you raise the question, who is bombed by Russians in this area? Now, this information on 200 Christians was actively supported and spinned off by the State Department. It was noted by our American colleagues. They dramatically criticized the practice of hostages. But hostages are taken by terrorists, or these terrorists were good in August and now probably they are very good. This is painful logics. Next, a week ago, Western mass media described the execution of 7 persons in Rastan for non-traditional orientation. And then you ask us, whom do we bomb? July 29, there was an American airstrike in Idlib on tactical group of ISIS. And it was immediately mentioned in the report on the activity of the coalition to combat ISIS. Now you ask us whom we bomb. And a separate story is the use of photo and video materials in mass media and, unfortunately, in official structures. On the first day, there was a story that from the Russian bomb, the leader of moderate opposition was killed. This is the quote. When a journalist prepares the material, it does not matter where he gets his information from, but currently, with the development of mass media and information, within 5 minutes you may check what was said previously on the same subject. And previously, mass media said that this person was captured by ISIS in January of 2014. And in other mass media, it was said that in summer 2015 he was killed. Just let us try to be objective. If you have no other sources to check your information and you cannot call to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, just be courageous and write in your newspapers that there is some alternative information which was published, that this person was dead long ago. But this is not done, and I can tell you why. In the General Assembly couloirs, we have lots of talks with our colleagues. Someone supported the activities of Russia. Someone asked questions, but there were several meetings when all our colleagues repeated one and the same phrase. I will deliver this quote in English.
Is more important than reality.
Perception is more important than reality. And what is going on now is the development of this perception, which is more important than reality, because reality is combating ISIS. And the examples I have shown to you, this is the shaping of this perception, but it may turn into another reality, which would be different from real reality, which is a threat to all of us.
To continue, there's a separate topic, accusations, Russian airspace forces in the death of civilians and what is quite unfair, children. The pictures that were made a few days before the Russian operations. And the pictures that we use, they're quite often the pictures of bombed cities without any specification of what city was that, and one was a picture taken or exact coordinates of the place. They're just stating that Russia has inflicted bomb attacks and the people are running in fear, and a boy is carrying a loaf of bread to the family that is sheltering itself from the Russian bombings. Listen, this is just clear propaganda. If you're showing a boy carrying a loaf of bread to the family, hiding, then please show the boys whose parents were beheaded by the ISIS forces. And our military are there in the region. Just try to stop being propagandist. Don't allow yourself to be led, because you are forming new reality and you are turning perception into reality. There's so many examples. Just show us some more slides. Those are the captions, some of the captions and the content that many of the mass media were producing. Let me remind you once more that practically hour by hour reporting is available on what are the Russian forces, Russian military doing, the airspace forces. They are available, they are published on the Russian Defense Ministry site. And the Defense Ministry is open and it's available for questions. And it's also true for the Foreign Affairs Ministry. And I don't believe that we should be representing here the data or the references for the Defense Ministry sites. You will easily find them. But I will ask you, just use those sources of information. I'm not telling you that you have to agree to that, but it is an alternative source of information and it must be used. And I cannot but tell you that on a daily basis we are reading the data, the briefings from the State Department of the US, and there are some very absurd accusations that there's a lack of a Russian readiness to join the international coalition. But we have repeatedly stated that we are not against joint efforts to counter ISIS, but we cannot join the coalition on the terms that it is acting, because they are not in line with international law. And it has been clearly described the way the international coalition is acting on the Iraqi territory. That is legal because there is an agreement from Baghdad government. And if similar steps or measures are taken in relation to the Syrian government, that will be legal and lawful, and we will have no grounds to accuse the international coalition to blame them for the lack of lawful character. We are not giving up our strive for joint efforts, but we will not agree to the illegal actions of the coalition. And the same thing happened about 10 years ago when we were talking about the Iraqi campaign, and we were right. In the end, we were right. This very similar approach is here. We will not take part in anything that is illegal. There is no resolutions of the UN, and there is no agreement of the official capital of the country, and we will not take part in that. And we will not repeat that many more times. Because every time there is a biased attitude, and that is forming attitudes of the population in the respective countries where the officials keep stating that. And I was interviewed today by a Western broadcasting company, and they tell me, well, Russia is sending its warplanes to the country, and they are not afraid of any miscoordination with the coalition forces, coalition airplanes, so there could be possibly incidents. Are you feeling any responsibility? We are not just feeling our responsibility. 2 months ago or so, Russia has proposed that there should be a two-track resolution of the Syrian problem. First, uniting the efforts of all those opposing or countering ISIS, both on the air and on the land, coordinating the efforts of everyone who is opposing ISIS, exchange of information, exchange of intelligence data. And the second track is stepping up the political settlement based on the Geneva resolutions, and we're proceeding from the understanding of our responsibility, and we're fully aware that there could be incidents, and the only way to prevent that is coordinating the efforts, and that proposition was done officially, not behind the doors. It was a public proposition. It was not just public, it was made at the negotiations table using diplomatic channels, and we have attracted the public attention to that. We have been putting it on the table, so how could one state today that we are provoking incidents? And another thing to that, I was told by the British reporters, a British reporter has actually asked me, and I had to respond that, are you aware that it is specifically your country that has stopped all the contacts on the military channels with Russia? So where's the responsibility of Russia? We are open, we are available for contacts, we are prepared to respond to any queries, both on military channels, diplomatic channels. You have to pick up the phone and call us. You have to specify, do you have anything else to propose? Go ahead and propose any other channel of information exchange, and we'll probably agree to that. But the issue is we have to coordinate those efforts, but you cannot, on the one hand, to give up the context, and on the other hand, accuse us of not coordinating the efforts. So in particular, a representative of the State Department of the US, Mr. Toner, stated that the current format of Russian operations in Syria is wrong, is definitely wrong. Well, it is strange. We've had contacts at the higher level, at the top level, and our presidents have met. And there have been repeated meetings at the General Assembly of our foreign affairs ministries. But they keep telling us that this is wrong. Well, suggest something that will be right. We keep suggesting things, and we are open to dialogue, and we are calling for coordination of efforts. In particular, Mr. Turner stated that currently in Washington they don't see any actions from the Russian side to support its declarations to fight ISIS. How could that happen? How do they fail to see the efforts? They are not listening to us. Whatever we are stating both publicly or via diplomatic channels, all that is forming up the public opinion. And Russia allegedly does not demonstrate so far any willingness to join the campaign of the coalition. And they keep stating that day to day. We have stated our position, and we have said we could take part in a legal, lawful operation. And this is a position based not our specific Russian vision. No, it's a position based on the international law, and they have started to talk about international law in the last 2 years only. And one more thing. Something that is really causing misunderstanding. Allegations that Russia is not willing to share information. Let me state it once again, third time, the umpteenth time, the 100th time. Well, performing a counter-terrorist operation based on the official request of official Damascus. The counter-terrorist operations are not held at the press conferences. A counter-terrorist operation is called to eradicate, to destroy terrorists. And if there are any questions on the conduct of those operations, Russian Federation is open to any contacts with our foreign counterparts. There are defense ministry channels for that. That would be completing my introductory part, and I'm prepared to take your questions. Yes, please. Hurriyet, Turkish newspaper. My name is Erdoğan. I have a specific question to you. Yesterday evening, the Turkish Foreign Affairs Ministry stated that the Turkish airspace was violated by the Russian planes for the second time, and that time it was a MiG-29 fighter, and it was last Sunday that was the first breach of the Russian territories. Do you have any statement? Well, there was a statement published by the Defense Ministry, and I know that my colleagues will be prepared to answer those specific questions, so that if that statement is not sufficient for you, the Defense Ministry has provided an exhaustive comment. And we have confirmed that on the Foreign Affairs resources that our ambassador in Turkey has been called up, and again an exhaustive comment was provided by the Defense Ministry. And as far as I'm aware, and I've read this statement, and let me quote. With the assurances of the Turkish side, there's no crisis in the Russian-Turkish affairs, and the information agencies believe that the accident has been exhausted. And that was the information of the agencies as it is now. But what about the second plane? What you have stated, that has to do with the Sukhoi 30 fighter, and that was last Saturday. And I'm talking about MiG-29. That was actually, that happened today. And Turkey has called up the Russian ambassador again. Well, again, the Russian Defense Ministry has provided a comment. If that comment is not enough, you will see and you will get more comments. The Izvestia newspaper, Tatiana Maikova, please comment the recent information by CNN referring to the Pentagon sources that Russia might begin land operations in Syria. Well, this is yet another thesis that has been, the last few days, have been circulated intensely. And that is being done, and I would say a very unfair way, because they're trying to always refer to the Afghani campaign. And everyone knows that is a hard page of the Russian our history, but we all know that there'll be no return to those days and those declarations. They do them on the background of the complete oblivion and no particular quotes, no citations, no quotations. There have been so many statements by the President, the Defense Minister, Foreign Affairs Minister, and I have looked it up today. Valentina Matvienko has actually issued a statement there will be definitely no ground operations in Syria. Completely impossible. But those quotations are being ignored. So every time unknown sources in Pentagon sought to comment the intentions of the Russian Federation, it would be fair if there is an opinion in Pentagon, step out, put it publicly, or pick up the phone, call the Defense Ministry. And three, we're talking about serious mass media, and we still hope that CNN is a serious source. Please quote directly. The Russian top leaders have repeatedly stated there will be no ground operations. Definitely.
Estonian TV. Actually, I found the newspaper here, Moscow Times, which says Russian propaganda cancel Syria. This is in Moscow. How can you comment on that? What shall I comment? What is your question? Maybe that is why you say that the West criticizes Russia, because Russia cannot somehow establish its stand. I'm very glad that you are in Moscow and found some alternative point of view. You are from Estonia. So you will say to your colleagues that there is an alternative point of view in Moscow. You show this newspaper to them and you say that, well, there are different points of view presented in Russia. Vishnikova from Interfax. Maria Vladimirovna, yesterday the Ukrainian representative in political subgroup said that tomorrow Normandy 4 is planned to have a meeting. Will Sergei Lavrov is to join this meeting? I have no information. I cannot say that this telephone conversation will take place. If it is to be planned, we shall inform you about it. So far, I cannot confirm this information. My first question. So Russia criticized the Western operations for some technical reasons, and it was said that airstrikes would not produce any result. So what is the difference between Western airstrikes and Russian airstrikes? Can you tell me? And the second question, Sergei Lavrov said that the Russian strikes are targeted against ISIS and other terrorist groups. This is a military operation, so you should have a list of these groups. Can you name these groups which are fighting in Syria? Following the assessment of Russia, they are terrorists. All right, let's begin from the first question, and I thank you for this. What is the difference between Russian Air Force operations from the operations of the coalition as to efficiency? Let us leave it for the military experts to discuss the efficiency, although we said that within 1 year of effective operations of this coalition, ISIS did not reduce its territory, but the scope of crimes increased. But the principal difference is pretty obvious. Since the military strikes from the air are not efficient, why Russia flew in? But that's what we talk about. Maybe we presented it in a wrong way. We said that we flew in following the requests from Syria, and we coordinate our activity with the Syrian army, which on the ground fights ISIS. This is the key issue. And we say that the coalition actions are inefficient just because of this, because you cannot fight ISIS from the air only. You should unite your efforts with those who fight on the ground. In Syria, this is definitely the Syrian army. This is what we've been trying to explain. If you quote me directly, if you tell just this, probably people would understand that coordination of efforts with the Syrian army is important, and the American coalition does not want to coordinate their efforts with Damascus and the Syrian army, which fights ISIS on the ground. This is the principal difference. Yeah, well, you asked me about the military strikes from the air. They will be supported. The ground actions will be supported by actions from the air. This is the issue of, if this is the issue of pride, please forget about your pride, because first you said that you are not going to interact with them, but the trouble is too big. And now you have to understand that you have to act. Unite your efforts with the Syrian army and you would bear fruits. but nothing was done. So we had to flew in. Now, terrorists. I have just said that, but I would repeat it. The list of groups, of terrorist groups. You represent Arabia. You are from the region. You should understand that the problem is that these groups are pretty flexible. There are terrorist monsters like ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra, big terrorist groups. There are smaller ones. In 2014, the United States of America made air strikes on Khorasan groups. There is such a group. And nobody objected. It was not ISIS, it was not Jabhat al-Nusra, but the strikes were made. Is this group in the American list of terrorist organizations? I don't know. I'm not sure. But there was no question about why it was bombed. ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra are complemented by many other terrorist and extremist groups. But they import and export their activities. This import and export of terrorists, they are flexible. They make settlements and they fight each other. They coordinate their activity. Then they move into other camps. Again, I may quote Sergei Lavrov, who said, if they speak as terrorists, if they fight as terrorists, if they act as terrorists, they are terrorists. The criteria is obvious. Настасья Novak, Black Knot Agency. Please, details about Turkey. What is the stand of Turkey in the Syrian conflict? What interests they have and what they support? The Turkey opposition, well, Turkey should speak about it. I'm sorry, I have 5 more minutes. Chinese information agency Xinhua. Presently, the Russian Air Force operates in Syria. But they say that only using force from there you cannot win over ISIS. Will the ground troops be used in Syria to fight ISIS? Are you ready to invite other countries to fight ISIS, including China? Well, this is the question to each country, whether this country is ready and capable and feels its potential to participate in this fight. So this is the problem not only for the Middle East or Europe or the United States of America. This is a general problem. This is the problem for everybody. If your country has potential resources for this kind of fight, it's fine, but the issue of coordination and interaction is extremely important. Now, about our ground forces involvement, we have been discussing that thoroughly, and I may quote our President, our Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense, and the head of the Federation Council. They all say that no ground operation is under consideration. Irina Toporkova, Live News in Norway. They were the serial occupied how the Russia invades the Baltic, the northern countries, and Norway in particular. How can you explain this? Probably I would not give you any assessment, because movies are for viewers, for audience. I don't watch this kind of movies. Adam, Saddam Agency. What's your assessment of the role of the international coalition in Iraq? It seems to help agreement with the government and Iraqi army. And my second question, 2 years ago in Syria there was no ISIS. The so-called moderate opposition kidnapped to metropolis and grabbed many towns and made lots of suffering for the people of Syria, and that's why it's called moderate. As to the moderate opposition which you mentioned, or subdivisions of this opposition which also fight against ISIS, which we were told by our American partners. Again, there was a comment of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, which he made yesterday at his press conference. We asked the question to our American colleagues whom they have in mind, where they recommend to us to coordinate our efforts with certain free army. Where are these people? How we can find them? So far there was no response from Washington. You also asked about Iraq. I can only repeat what we've said again, that the better coordination would make the whole activities to fight ISIS more efficient. If someone is ready to contribute to fight ISIS, we wouldn't be against this cooperation for some political reasons, because this is senseless and dangerous. About military success, you ask military experts. The head of the committee, Kumaetov, on defense, said that the competent bodies are against going to the Middle East, going to the Middle East by people who are volunteers who want to go and fight in the Middle East. Well, we don't have this kind of information. I think this person made some new statements today. Officially, I can say no. Ground companies, no ground campaigns are in question. This is not an issue. No volunteers. Officially, nobody is going to invite any volunteers. Probably someone said something which was misunderstood. We have lots of politicians, deputies with their own opinion, and of course they have to express this opinion. We comment on our official stand, and this is obvious. No ground operations are planned. No Russian troops on land in Syria. 5 more minutes, Bloomberg. About volunteers. Is this the violation of the Russian legislation? If you just go to Syria as a volunteer to fight on the Assad side, or it's not a violation of the law? Second, you said that Russia would not repeat the Afghanian experience. Can you explain why you are so sure that this experience will never be repeated? Well, I have said several times, I have made several quotes about the Russian legislation. I'll give you references, not to misquote something. About the possibility of involvement of Russian volunteers, I'll give you references to the legislation. France Press. Our question is about what you were against now. Russia is criticized for working with authorities who killed thousands of their own people and turned illegitimate. What can you say to this? the authorities became illegitimate. Can you provide me with some international document which says that these authorities are illegitimate? Name it or quote it. Name some decision of the international body which said that these authorities were not legitimate. You cannot quote this, and there is no such a document. We understand and we heard that different world leaders of different levels mentioned the illegitimacy of these authorities and supported their words. But what you have just said, it's not that we say that this is the best government in the world, that these are nice people. We see the mistakes of this regime, and we regularly mentioned our assessments, not only in recent years, but 4 years ago and even more. We are quite objective in our assessment of what goes on there now. But if this regime will be deposed with violence, which is the idea of the Western leaders. And actually these people signed Geneva Communique, by the way. This Geneva Communique of 2012, it says that any political changes in Syria should take place by national agreement, and only the Syrian people should make its own destiny. So whether you have to dethrone the governments, this is against the Geneva Communique, which was approved by the Security Council members. The issue is what will happen if this scenario will be implemented into practice. We saw that in Libya. First, the figure of Gaddafi was demonized, then he was murdered, and how he was murdered. And we saw what happened after the events. So if we look back now, and all of you and mass media would be asked, what kind of script would you use? Which way would you go to murder the leader who was not angel, or acting against turning this country into a black hole? So everybody, each one of you would favor the second script, and that's what we are saying now. Let us deal with ISIS. Let us launch the political process, the second track. And you say it's not there, as if it was not Russia who initiated the Geneva Communique, which mentioned the political transit. We work with Damascus and stimulate political reforms and transit. It was Russia who gave the venue to hold the dialogue between opposition and official Damascus.
That is a big issue, and it's a matter of unbiased attitudes. All that is there. We realize that this is a complex issue. So if somebody is willing to shift us into this Libyan scenario, no, we won't be part of that, because Syria could detonate in a much worse way than Libya. And thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to go.